a community at risk. And we hope that you might consider to fund our community so our mitigation plan might be able to help the people of Japan. I stare in awe as I watch the colossal wave hit land, pushing trees and buildings back as if they were mere dominoes. The tremendous wall of brown-gray water draws closer. Suddenly, the wave envelops me in its dark gray waters. Do not go outside in the middle of the storm. That's just like debris rushes above me. Overhead, I see a trickle of light, and I claw toward the top. I take a gulp of air before going right back down under. This is the tale, the snapshot of what the human cost of the 2011 tsunami is. And we would like to share with you the impact of this. And there is no better way to tell this than by looking at what Japan looked like before and after the tsunami and the earthquake struck. Before, you see fields and buildings and everything in order. And with the power of technology, we can see very quickly what it looked like afterwards, the same view, with water tearing everything out and destroying many areas, many lands, and much of the environment. But this is not just a tale of disaster and destruction. This is a tale of resilience. It's about the people of Japan who have risen above the challenges of natural hazards and created a disaster plan that has saved lives. And there's no better way to tell this than by the people of Japan. Look at technology allows us to see what the disaster area looked like just a few months after the tsunami. And when we fast forward, we see that construction and rebuilding is taking place all across Japan to make sure that the lessons are learned. So in this presentation, we would like to talk to you about the 6 areas of the disaster preparedness plan. First, why is Japan at risk? Second, what have been some past disasters that have affected Japan, and what have we learned from them? Third, preparedness. What are the things that Japan had in place that saved lives? Fourth, response. What happened in the minutes, hours, and very few days after the disaster struck? Fifth, the recovery. What happened in the weeks and months and yes, years after the disaster struck to recover? And lastly, mitigation. Our group's research will create some recommendations of what needs to be done in order to help Japan prevent even further damage in future disasters. So first, we would like to talk about why Japan is a community at risk. It is all based on geography. Japan lies at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, with the massive Pacific plate being pushed under in a process of subduction under the Eurasian plate, with 2 smaller plates also colliding in that place, the Philippine plate and the Obtuse plate. Japan is entirely formed because of these forces. It's 4 large islands, and all the small islands are 100% caused because of volcanic activity and subduction, pushing this land above the ocean's levels to create the country of Japan. We will put more information here about the science, but I'm going to move on. As we look at Japan, we realize that Japan is hit with hundreds of earthquakes. Hundreds of earthquakes a year? No, hundreds of earthquakes a month. Our group's data has used the USGS Geological Service data to look at earthquakes just from the last 30 days. And these are all the earthquakes that have happened just in the last 30 days since Saturday. And you can see the massive number, hundreds of earthquakes that hit Japan every single month. And when you change to only show earthquakes that are 4.5 and above, those you could feel, because some of these are 2.5 and above, and you may not have felt those. Watch how many of these disappear and how many of these remain, showing how much earthquakes Japan is affected by. We might put more information here about the mean, median, mode, what data you've collected to show that, but I'm going to move on. Past disasters demonstrate that there have been many things that have attacked and hurt Japan. One of the greatest tragedies of all of human history happened in 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake. 7.9 on the Richter scale, a massive earthquake that killed more than 100,000 people, causing 1.9 million people to be homeless. This was a massive disaster, but Japan learned from it. Fast forward to 1995, the Great Kobe earthquake. 6.8 on the magnitude scale, not quite as damaging as Kanto, and 6,000 people who died, and more than 300,000 who were left without homes because they were destroyed. But today we'd primarily like to talk to you about the March 11th, 2011 earthquake and tsunami. An earthquake that destroyed something in unbelievable proportions, with a magnitude of, can you believe it? 9.0. Can you believe it? 9.0. How many earthquakes in all of human history have been greater than that? Of recorded human history, only 3 have been greater. This is the 4th most powerful earthquake ever, causing 18,000 people to die or go missing, and more than 228,000 people displaced from their homes or homeless as a result of the destruction. The impacts of this earthquake could have been much worse, but thanks to Japan's preparedness, response, and recovery, many, countless lives were saved. But the impacts remain today, impacting the environment, impacting Japan, impacting communities, and yes, impacting the entire world because of the threat to the Fukushima nuclear reactor. Imagine an airport that within seconds is swept away because of the power of a massive wave. This is how strong the earthquake was and the tsunami. So Japan has been riddled by earthquake after earthquake after earthquake. But through it all, they've made changes to their construction. They've made changes to the way they deal and respond. And so Japan has a great preparedness in terms of preparing for earthquakes. Japan has more than 4,000 seismic sensors located across Japan and off the ocean. 4,000 sensors that can detect when an earthquake has occurred and moving faster than the seismic waves that travel through the rocks, giving you maybe this many seconds. You maybe this many seconds. You maybe 20 seconds of advance notice that could be the difference between death, if you're trapped in a building, and life, if you make it outside to safety. Because Japan is on the edge of the sea with 4 major islands, tsunamis are part of survival in Japan. And there are always tsunami evacuation routes prepared, and there is evacuation plans that are practiced regularly. During the 2011 tsunami, based on a survey, 58% of the people made it to higher ground and to safety as a result of the tsunami practice and making sure that people evacuated. Japan has some of the best, no, it has the best seismic building codes in the world. Imagine the 4th greatest earthquake ever in human history, and this is what happens to some of the old buildings. They're still standing. This is what happens to some of the new buildings, virtually untouched because of the building codes. Contrast that to the earthquake that happened in Haiti just a few years earlier. It was 1,000 times less powerful, and yet 200,000 people died because buildings collapsed on them. But Japan has buildings that will stand in the midst of even the strongest earthquakes. And lastly, Japan's preparedness involves early detection centers that will send mobile alerts to your phone, mobile device, or computer so that you might have those few seconds to get to safety if needed. That was the preparedness. Now we'd like to talk about the response. And the response is in three areas. The first area that we'd like to talk about is how Japan responded in the evacuation centers that were there. Within minutes and hours, thousands of people flooded to the evacuation centers. And as a result of that, there was enough food, shelter, and water for everyone to have 3 meals a day. Electricity was restored rather quickly. And there was a smooth processing of donations so that people could get the bedding, the clothing, and everything that was needed to be safe. In addition to that, hospitals had generators that backed up so that essential medical care could be provided. And yes, that important tool of psychosocial and emotional counseling was there. I can't get in touch with my family. I don't know where they are. Are they safe? And people are available to help them and to talk with them through this very difficult process. Second, the government response was also impressive. Within hours, 19,000 police, fire, search and rescue, and emergency personnel were out moving and helping to make sure that people were safe. They put out fires. They were able to make sure that buildings were ready to go and were safe and evacuated if needed. And they had prefabricated buildings ready to start construction. You've lost your home? We'll start building it today because we have it ready to go, so you'll have some place to be. And water and electricity were restored. Third, and by far the most dangerous, was the damage to the Fukushima nuclear plant. 3 of the 4 reactors within minutes began to melt down because the electricity was out and they could no longer stay cool, and they had been damaged by the earthquake and the massive tsunami. Very quickly, boats were able to put water to put out the fires and to try to contain the cooling by pouring seawater into the reactors so that they might be able to be cooled without melting down and causing a nuclear disaster that would infect, yes, the entire world. They quickly assessed radiation levels so that they could know how long the workers could be in an area before it was dangerous to them, and getting new workers to come through. And they used seawater to submerge the reactors to make sure that they could cool. In terms of recovery, we'd like to talk about those same 3 issues. In the days and weeks and months and years afterwards, the donation centers and the emergency personnel continued to repair health facilities such as hospitals. They went into remote areas so they could make sure everyone was safe. They continued to treat victims so that families could be reunited and continued that psychosocial and emotional treatment. The government response is frankly unbelievable. March 11th, the tsunami. March 17th, they began to repair this road. It looked like this. 6 days later, it looked like that. That's how efficient the government was in its recovery, and might very well be a model for many of you. The buildings were assessed and began to be repaired or plans put in place. Debris was removed, and permanent housing was found for those who were displaced. But by far the most dangerous was the nuclear plant in Fukushima. It took 9 months for them to achieve a cool shutdown of those 3 reactors, so they are no longer generating nuclear energy and nuclear waste. 9 months. During that entire time, water needed to be pumped in. Once it reached contamination levels, it needed to be taken out and then decontaminated, filtered, and returned if possible to the sea. Massive storage containers so that more and more seawater could be able to cool and take the strontium and chromium and toxic levels of nuclear waste. And these were able to be recovered so that within 9 months a cool shutdown was able to be occurred of those 3 reactors. So this is what Japan had in place. But now we'd like to talk about the mitigation, what our group has found and what needs to change. First of all, education is very important. You heard earlier that 58% of the people made it to higher ground. 42% of the people didn't think it was serious enough to do something. Education is very important so that when there is an alert, those few precious seconds can be used to save lives. Education is important so the children of Japan, the adults, and the elderly know what to do in appropriate levels. Education and research is needed on these fault lines so we understand more about what's happening around Japan. And safer buildings are being built. And lastly, education is very important so that we can communicate the effective protocols that are needed in the case of a future disaster. But mitigation is most important for the Fukushima nuclear plant. The Fukushima nuclear plant is going to take 30 to 40 years to decommission and make sure all the nuclear waste is safe. Now TEPCO, the main owner of the plant, thinks they can do it in about a third that time. But this is going to be a very long process. And we have several recommendations. The first of which is to make sure that generators are placed high above sea level so that any future tsunamis would not interrupt the power supply, so that no future damage might occur to the reactors of the Fukushima nuclear plant. So we thank you donors for listening to our presentation. We hope you will consider funding our thing. And in conclusion, that was written by a 6th grader. Japan was dramatically affected by the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Many lives were lost due to this terrible, unspeakable disaster. The after effects of the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear waste continues to impact our people, our community, our environment. And we continue to recover from this tragedy, knowing we must build our community's resilience against future natural disasters. Due to where we live as a country in Japan, we will forever be at risk for earthquakes as well as tsunamis. We must preserve our lands in the future and prepare plans that can conquer any future hazards. We need your help to ensure that our children might grow up in safety and optimism. Our nation needs your help. We plead of you, we beg of you, please fund our community so that our community might be strong for the future. Thank you. Okay, so that's the presentation you're going to give. How many of you are in groups of 4? So there might be 4 speakers, one for each.